Hi, everyone. We're ready to start Chapter 2, and I'm also going to read Chapter 3 today. Hopefully, it's Friday and you're watching this then. Also, I will try to point out a few of the vocabulary words that you will be responsible for defining and using a synonym for on the worksheet that will be posted on the website. Just a little review. Louisiana and her grandmother are on their way out of Georgia or out of Louisiana into Georgia. Much to Louisiana's discomfort, she's upset that her grandmother has taken her in the middle of the night to she doesn't know where, and she doesn't know what is going to happen. So let's find out. Chapter 2. It starts on page 8. This is what happened. We stood on the side of the road in Georgia, just past the Florida-Georgia state line, which is not at all in any way a line, yet people insist that it exists. Think about that. Granny turned to me and said, "All will be well." I said, "I do not believe you." I refused to look at her. We were both quiet for a very long time. 3 semis drove past us. They're talking about semi trucks. One was painted with a picture of a cow standing in a field of green grass. I was jealous of that cow because she was at home and I was not. It seemed like a very sad thing to be jealous of a fake cow on the side of a truck. I must warn you that a great deal of this story is extremely sad. When the 3rd semi blew past us without even slowing down, Granny said, "I'm only attending to your best interests." Well, what was in my best interests was being with Raymie Clark and Beverly Topinski. Raymie and Beverly were the friends of my heart, and they had been my best friends for 2 solid years. I could not survive without them. I couldn't. It was just not possible. So what I said to Granny was, "I want to go home. Being with Archie is in my best interests. Raymie and Beverly and Betty, the one-eyed dog, are in my best interests. You don't understand anything about my best interests." "Now is not the time," said Granny. "This conversation is inopportune." That means untimely or not necessary. "I feel extremely unwell, but nonetheless, I'm persevering, as should you." Well, I did not care that Granny felt extremely unwell. And I was tired of persevering. I crossed my arms over my chest. I stared down at the ground. There were a lot of ants running around on the side of the highway, looking very busy and pleased with themselves. Why would ants choose to live on the side of a highway where they were just going to get run over by cars and semis on a regular basis? Since I was not talking to Granny, there was no one in the world for me to ask this question of. It was a very lonely feeling. And then an old man in a pickup truck stopped. The old man in the pickup truck was named George Luttrell. He rolled down his window and raised his cap off his head and said, "Howdy, I'm George Luttrell." I smiled at him. It is best to smile. That is what Granny has told me my whole life. If you have to choose between smiling and not smiling, choose smiling. It fools people for a short time. It gives you an advantage, according to Granny. "Now, what are you 2 lovely ladies doing on the side of the road?" said George Luttrell. "Good morning, George Luttrell," said Granny. "It seems we have miscalculated and run entirely out of gasoline." She smiled a very large smile. She used all of her teeth. "Miscalculated," said George Luttrell. "Run entirely out of gasoline? My gracious." "Could we impose upon you for a ride to the nearest gas station and back again?" Impose means to ask for a favor. You could impose upon me," said George Luttrell. I considered not imposing upon George Luttrell, because the truth is that in addition to being tired of persevering, I was also tired of imposing. Granny and I were always imposing on people. That is how we got by. We imposed. Also, we borrowed. Sometimes we stole. I considered not getting into the truck. I considered running down the highway back to Florida, but I did not think I would be able to run fast enough. I've never been able to run fast enough. And by that I mean that no matter where I go, Granny seems to find me. Is that fate? Destiny? The power of Granny? I do not know. I got in the truck. The inside of George Luttrell's truck smelled like tobacco and vinyl. The seat was ripped up and stuffing was coming out of its places. We certainly do appreciate this, George Luttrell, said Granny. Once somebody told Granny what their name was, she never lost a chance to use it. She said that people like to hear the sound of their own names above and beyond any other sound in the world. She said it was a scientifically proven fact. I doubted it very sincerely. I sat in George Luttrell's truck and picked at the stuffing coming out of the seat, and then I threw the little pieces of stuffing fluff out the window. "Stop that, Louisiana," said Granny. But I didn't stop. I threw pieces of truck stuffing out the window, and I thought about the people and the animals I had left behind. Ramey Clark, who loved to read and who listened to all of my stories. Beverly Topinski, who was afraid of nothing and who was very good at picking locks. And then there was Archie, who was king of the cats. And Buddy, the one-eyed dog, who was also known to us as the dog of our hearts. What if I never got the chance to use those names again? What if I was destined to never again stand in front of those people and that cat and that dog and say their names out loud to them? It was a tragic thought. I threw more stuffing from George Luttrell's truck window. The stuffing looked like snow flying through the air. If you squinted, it did. If you squinted really hard. I'm good at squinting. George Luttrell took us to a gas station called Vic's Valve. Granny started the work of talking Mr. Luttrell into pumping some gas into a can for her and also making him pay for what he pumped. And since I had no desire to witness her efforts to get the gas that would only take me further from my home and friends, I walked away from the two of them and went inside Vic's Valve, where it smelled like motor oil and dirt. There was a tall counter with a cash register on it. Next to the cash register, there was a rack that was full of bags of salted peanuts, and even though my heart was broken and I was filled with the most terrible despair, my goodness, I was hungry. I stared very hard at those little bags of peanuts. The man behind the counter was sitting on a chair that had wheels, and when he saw me, he came out from behind the counter like a spider, moving his feet back and forth and back and forth. The chair made a squeaky, exasperated noise as it rolled toward me. Exasperated can mean irritating or annoying. "How do you do?" I said. I smiled using all my teeth. "My Granny's outside getting some gas." The man turned his head and looked at Granny and George Luttrell, and then he looked back at me. "Yep," he said. I considered him. He had a lot of hair in his nose. "How much are those peanuts?" I said. I said this even though I did not have any money at all. Granny always said, "Ask the price exactly as if you intended to pay." The man didn't answer me. "Are you Vic?" I said. "Could be." "I'm Louisiana Elephant." "Yep," he said. He took a yellow spotted handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped it across his forehead. His hands were almost entirely black with grease. I said, "I've been made to leave home against my will." "That right there is the story of the world," said Vic. "It is?" I said. "Yep." "I hate it," I said. "I have friends at home." Vic nodded. He folded his spotted handkerchief up into a neat square and put it back in his pocket. "You can take as many of them little bags of peanuts as you want," he said. He nodded in the direction of the peanut rack. "Free of charge," he said, and then he rolled himself back around the counter. Well, this was the only good thing that had happened to me since Granny woke me up at 3 a.m. and told me that the day of reckoning had arrived. In some ways, this is a story of woe, that means trouble, and confusion, but it's also a story of joy and kindness and free peanuts. "Thank you," I said. I helped myself to 14 bags. Vic smiled at me the whole time I was taking the peanuts from the rack. There is goodness in many hearts, in most hearts, in some hearts. I love peanuts. Chapter 3. George Luttrell drove us back to our car and put the gas in it for us, and Granny smiled at him and called him Mr. George Luttrell, our hero, and the whole time I could not stop thinking about Vic's valve. Because behind the counter at Vic's, there was a calendar hanging on the wall. The calendar said, October 1977, in swirly gold letters, and there was a picture of a tree covered in red leaves underneath the words. It was a very pretty tree. But the important thing is that next to the calendar, there was a phone. It was a green phone. It was mounted on the wall, and it was covered with greasy black fingerprints. What do you think Louisiana wanted to do? I should have asked Vic if I could use that phone. I felt like someone in a fairy tale who had wasted her one wish. I wished for 14 bags of peanuts, but I should have wished to make a phone call. And then I could have called Beverly Topinski and asked her to come and get me. Beverly Topinski could figure out a way to come and get anybody. Beverly, if you are reading this, you know it's true. There are the rescuers in this world, and there are the rescued. I've always fallen into the second category. We were back on the road, and even though it was October, it was hot in the car. And it was made hotter still by the fact that I absolutely refused to speak to Granny. You can shun me, Louisiana, she said. That means ignore me and not act like I'm not there. You can turn your face away from me, but it does not change my abiding love for you. I stared out the window. Do not worry, said Granny. I'm working toward our date with destiny, but I must tell you that I feel somewhat hobbled by my unwellness. She cleared her throat. She waited, but I did not ask what kind of unwell Granny was. Instead, I continued to stare out the window. I ate my peanuts one by one, and I was glad that I had taken 14 bags of them, because there were not very many peanuts in each bag. I did not offer to share the peanuts with Granny, because I was not in any way feeling generous of spirit. Louisiana Elephant, said Granny, the day will come when you regret not speaking to me. I doubted it. Somewhere past Wendora, Granny started to whimper. Wendora's a city. And then the whimper became a moan. Granny moaned so loudly that I forgot about not talking to her. I said, Granny, what is wrong? She said, oh, my tooth, my tooth. Oh, it's the curse of my father. Which did not make any sense at all. Because the curse of Granny's father is not a tooth curse. It is a curse of sundering. A sundering is a separation or division between people or things. But we will not speak of that now. We slowed down, and then we went slower still. Granny moaned a great deal. And then after a while, she pulled the car over to the side of the road and climbed into the back seat and lay down. Granny, I said, what are you doing? I'm working to regain my strength, she said. Do not worry, Louisiana. I'm sure that I do not have to tell you that I did worry. Also, it didn't work. Granny did not regain her strength. She moaned louder. Then I looked back at her. Her cheeks were wet with sweat. Or maybe it was tears. Although I've never in my life known Granny to cry. Tears are for the weak of heart, Louisiana, and it is our job to be strong in this world. That was what Granny always said. What do you need, Granny? I asked. Instead of answering me, she howled. Granny, I shouted, you have to tell me what you need. Granny then said one word, and that word was dentist. It was not at all what I expected her to say. My goodness, I had been torn from my home and from my friends. There was a curse upon my head, and I was on the side of the road in Georgia with a granny who was asking for a dentist. What could I do? I I sat there for a minute and thought about my options, and there weren't many of them. And that is how it came to pass that I, Louisiana Elephant, slid behind the wheel of the car and cranked the engine and put the blinker on and pulled out onto the highway and went in search of a dentist. I hope you're wondering now what she's going to do and how this young girl is going to get her grandmother to a dentist, driving a car that she has no business being behind the wheel with. So think about what you think might happen next. In your interactive notebooks, I'd like you to write down what you think Louisiana will do or what will happen as she starts to drive. Also, on this, on your homework site here in the classroom, Google Classroom, there is a vocabulary sheet that you'll need to answer or define some of the vocabulary words, and it also asks you to write 2 sentences using 2 of the words that are on the list. I tried to explain some of the words as I found them, but feel free to ask Alexa or an adult in your household and try to use the sentences so that we know you understand what the word means. Have a great Friday, everybody, and have a wonderful weekend. I'll be back here again on Monday with the next installment of Louisiana's Way Home. I miss you guys. Bye.